Pray with me. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. You may be seated. So I'm going to do a dangerous thing and tell you right off the bat what my main point is. So while you're still awake, I want to make sure you get this, and then you can nod off as we go along. No, that's why I shouldn't do this. But here it is. Jesus values people. Now, it's something that we know. But it's also good to be reminded about this nowadays, both in our own personal lives and also observation of our civic life together. It's good to remember that Jesus values people. The story of the Gerasene demoniac, which we read last week, ties in with the passages we read today, and that is found on page 840. And if you want to turn there, this is Mark chapter 5. And the funny thing is, this is the Gerasene demoniac, and some Bibles, it will say that's what the title that they would have, but our blue Bibles here call it, Jesus Heals a Man with a Demon. I'm like, who wrote this title? The man did not have a demon. The man had a legion of demons. He had, legion is between 5,000 and 6,000, and the pigs themselves numbered 2,000. So it's like, I don't recommend it, any of you students out there getting out the pen and going, a legion of demons. We call him the Gerasene demoniac, and I like to call him the scary scene demons breaking out into pigs. That's my title. So that was last week that we read this story, and then this week we read about the hemorrhaging woman and Jairus' daughter, and they all mesh together. Let's talk about that. All three are stories of desperation and despair. Here we have a man living among the hills, bashing himself with stones and then howling his heart out. A woman had spent her entire life savings to try to get the bleeding to stop, and she's out of hope and out of money, and she is no better off. Now, we know very little about the 12-year-old girl who was on her deathbed, but her dad is a synagogue leader, and he has a name of Jairus. So a word and a thing to remember here is not all Jewish leaders are opposed to Jesus. Here is one, and he even has a name. Now, Jairus is distraught out of fear that this illness will send his daughter to the grave. But he has one last hope, and that's getting to Jesus in time. So these are stories of suffering, and pretty severe suffering at that. But they do have a number of common elements to the three. Now, this scary scene demon guy was possessed with so many demons that his life expectancy was looking pretty grim as well. Now, some people find it hard to understand why Jesus allowed the demons to destroy the pigs. Now, I am an animal lover myself, so I do question that. But we have to admit that the fate of the pigs demonstrates clearly the destructive intentions of the demons. See, Jesus values human life, but demons do not. So that is my point. And Jesus demonstrates the value that he places on human life, even over and against the life of the pigs. People are important to Jesus, and he knows their needs. This demon-possessed man needs to see that he has been freed, and that the people who are looking on, they need to see that too. So thus they witnessed the pig race over the cliff edge. We know that Jesus has compassion. And we see it with the transformed life of this man who was changed only because Jesus had the will to make it so, and then he had the power that was adequate to the task. Jesus values people, even if they are women who should not be touching the hem of his garment, but they're doing it anyway. We know this woman had sought help from many doctors, but we also know from ancient medical treatments they were harmful and very painful. Sometimes we can watch those movies when they bring out the leeches and just sort of shudder and think, oh my goodness, what are they doing? But they didn't know any better. And then take that back even further. And who knows what they were trying to do with her. And she was not getting better. She was instead getting worse. And she was financially ruined. See, people could not help the demoniac. People could not help this hemorrhaging woman either. They had reached the end of their rope. So this suffering woman surreptitiously touched Jesus' garment rather than directly asking him for healing. So why is that? That deserves a little reflection. Having heard about Jesus, the woman believed that Jesus, unlike her previous physicians, could actually heal her. What kind of hope does this display for us to see? But I consider that after all that she has been through, that she could still reach out and still hope that things could be different for her is really a testimony to her own hope and faith-filled character. See, Jesus values people, and his help was adequate to her need. Now, Jesus did indeed possess the kind of healing power that seeps out of his body and even onto his clothes. I mean, it's kind of crazy. The hemorrhaging woman believed that just touching him would bring her healing, and she was right. I would bet that she had outward signs that were pretty clear that things were bad off, and that there was no way, as a woman in her situation, that she was going to ask for his help directly. But Jesus values people, and his help is adequate to the task. So why did Jesus draw attention to her when it seemed clear that this woman she would really rather have slipped away just as stealthily as she came? He's not taking the cues from her. She didn't want his attention, and she certainly didn't want the attention of the rest of the crowd. But he perceived she had need of an encouraging conversation. That is why he asked, "Who touched me?" And as she comes forward, he could see on her face that his assessment was right. She had need that went beyond that of healing. She needed healing words too. So he said to her in verse 34, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Jesus wanted to seal, to ratify, or make known for all that it was her faith that had participated in her healing. Now, perhaps if we looked at Abraham and how that parallels with circumcision, you'll see what I'm saying. The epistle to the Romans in chapter 4, verse 11 asks this question: was it Abraham's faith that saved him, or circumcision? It says, quote, "He, as in Abraham, received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised." So we see that this outward actions, that is the circumcision, was a seal, an outward sign that Abraham really did have this inward and invisible faith. But we humans, we like to see things. We need to see things. We need to remember things and set down a memorial or a sign of the good things that God has done in our lives. Just like the demon-possessed man needed to see that he had been freed, the woman needed to be able to testify and confirm what she had already felt inside. Jesus' power was adequate to the task. Jesus put a seal on that miracle by his words to her. But what about Jairus? He had come to Jesus first. And then the progress towards his child, who was near death, was interrupted. And Jairus' own hope was slipping away with every passing minute. The crowds were delaying Jesus' progression, and now Jesus himself stops and he talks with her. But now, consider Jairus when he sees the members of his own household come up and approach. His heart would have sunk, and he would have known what they were about to say. This could only be bad news. And Jesus, who may have been able to do something for his daughter, had died, and he was now too late. But even as this inevitable news was beginning to sink in, I wonder if there was a shred of hope still alive in Jairus. Did he reflect on the story of Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, whose son also died? Did Jairus have hope that Jesus would be greater than Elijah and bring his son back, who brought the son back? It's possible he did indeed have that kind of faith, even though fear lurked just beneath the surface. Maybe he reflected on Elisha, another Old Testament prophet who raised the son of a Shunammite woman. Dare he hope such a thing? Or was he too numb, his fears having come true? So they keep walking towards his home, and we have no idea if words of encouragement were shared or if they walked in silence. But they arrived, and there was a commotion outside the home, as there should have been, since Jairus was in a leadership position in the community. Now, you may have already heard that people were hired as professional mourners, where even the poorest of families would be expected to hire 2 flutes and 1 wailing woman. Can you imagine this? What's your job? Oh, I'm a wailing woman. I got a good set of lungs on me, and I'm worth at least 2 women. What a job. So, from the mourner's perspective, the child had died, and it was final. But Jesus casts doubt on the finality of her state when he says in verse 39, she's not dead, but sleeping. Now, we know that Jesus did not mean that the girl was in a coma. And we know this because this metaphor of sleep is frequently used to describe death. My commentary listed 15 instances of sleep as a metaphor for death. Now, I will try to refrain from a Princess Bride illusion about being mostly dead. The similarity between sleep and death is self-evident. This 12-year-old girl's temporary experience of physical death will be so short, it will seem as though she were only taking a nap. It's like Jesus is saying, that is what you will see and experience in the future after I conquer death. It will seem like a short nap. Jesus values people, and he is the only one who can adequately take care of the troubles that people have, whether that's blood that won't stop or a stopped heart. See, people want to be helpful. We all want to be helpful, but we feel inadequate, and when we feel inadequate, we give up. See, the help that the doctors gave to this hemorrhaging woman was inadequate, not on purpose to be spiteful, but they just couldn't help her. The help that the doctors would have given to Jairus' daughter was equally inadequate for the task of healing her completely. Our human help is inadequate. But that doesn't mean that we shrink back from acts of compassion. So we bring people to Jesus. And we demonstrate that Jesus values people by acting with compassion towards all people, no exceptions. Jesus is the only one who can transform a little girl, a hemorrhaging woman, and a demonized man. We know this. Now, I want to reference another significant instance where we feel our own resources are too small, and that's in caring for the poor. We read it today from our lectionary reading, Deuteronomy 15, verse 7. I'll just read the first verse. If among you one of your brothers should become poor, if in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. See, Jesus values people, and so should we. The demonized, the sick, and even the poor, whose needs can almost overwhelm us. It is too easy to have our own crisis of faith because we go about our day forgetting who Jesus actually is. His compassion for the hopeless cases and for those up to their eyeballs in fear. We are the ones who have been called to value people, but when our help is inadequate, it's really too easy to hold back, to lack compassion. But we are living in a time when kindness as a way of life is needed now more than ever. So you are here in church today, and you may need to borrow a little bit of faith from your brothers and your sisters, or from me, your preacher, today. You may need to see Jesus and remember what ways he has already acted in your life to seal his love for you. So I say, Jesus is still Lord. Now notice I use the present tense. Who Jesus is right now is one reigning from heaven, full of compassion and power. Jesus, our Lord. Jesus is Lord even of the legion of demons, and with a word overcoming the powers of Satan. Jesus is Lord over our bodies and their desperate physical situations. Jesus is Lord over death itself, and therefore we as followers of Jesus are in good, strong, and trustworthy hands. See, we see the brokenness of our world in these stories, but we are left with hope as we catch a glimpse of our hope-filled future.